whenever people are talking about camera gear, lights, audio, recorders, microphones, you name it, it always ends up becoming about the specs, right? You always have to talk about it because that's what the product is. It's a technical device. It's a tool. It allows you to do a lot of creative things, but at the end of the day, it's a piece of hardware or software, and it's always about the specs. That's what every conversation comes down to when you're weighing, the pros and cons. What are the specs? What are the specs? What are the specs? This is even, something that I end up always talking about, and I have been recently with the A7S III, the Canon R5, the Lumix S1H, which, by the way, did show up. So I've got some fun stuff coming for this that I'll probably go over. I just got it today, so I've just been doing some test photo and video today. But if you've never had your hands on an S1H, which was me as of yesterday, but now I finally got it in my hand, and the first thing I'll say, I'll probably talk about this more in another video, but the first thing I'll say is that this thing is big. It is big and it is heavy. It has a lot of cool stuff, but it's big and it's heavy for what it is. But that's for another day. Anyway, we talk about specs a lot in cameras, and they are important, but at the end of the day, I don't want it to be lost that the specs don't really matter all that much. This is the nuance, this is the balance of the force of the whatever. Whenever you start talking about cameras, there's always someone that comes along and that will say, yes, but those don't matter. It's all about how you use them, and you can do anything. It's like in the right hands, a professional should be able to use whatever tool. And that is 100% true. And that's why I wanted to make this video talking specifically about that concept, that the specs don't matter, because it is true. We can argue about them, we can debate, have fun analyzing the bit rates and the codecs, and is that 422, is it 420, is it really dual ISO, are they doing some other trick, what, is it the camera that's overheating, or is it the cards that are overheating? There's so much technical stuff that goes into this profession because it involves the tools. I can't make a video or take a picture with my eyes alone. That is what sparks the vision for it, but I need the tool to do the job for me. So we start talking about megapixels and dynamic range, and what shutter do you need, and what white balance, and the color science, and all the technical stuff, all of the specs. But at the end of the day, the specs don't matter, because when you look at the history of content, people have been doing amazing things with far less than we have today in 2020. You look back 10 years ago, amazing content was being produced 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. Go back in time. I mean, if you go back all the way to the beginning of original film, obviously there have been some progressions, and you can see how things have evolved from, the days of Betamax or Mini DV or High 8, and how things have evolved and gotten better. But really, that shouldn't be the limitation of the content. There is no camera that you could buy in 2020 that would severely limit your ability to produce compelling, good content. Could it be a limiting factor in that you don't have quite as high of a frame rate as somebody else? If you have a Phantom and you can film a bullet smashing through glass and it's beautiful slow motion, there's cameras that you can't capture that same shot with, but there's no requirement that every film, every music video, every video has to have super high frame rate shots in it. That's not on a checklist anywhere. No one's telling you, hey, you have to do that. Just like no one's telling you, you have to have the most dynamic range in your camera, because you always need, everything to be backlit with the sun, and you need to be able to see out of every window. That's also not a requirement. There's a lot of films even that you'll watch where the windows are just blown out. They're just white, you can't see out there, or maybe it's just some sheer, kind of diffusion kind of thing, where, these things aren't written in stone anywhere where you have to be able to do X, Y, and Z to be a creative, to be a professional. Use the tools to the best of their ability. So if you want to use the Canon R5, or you want to use the A7S III, or you want to use a GH3 because it's all you have and it's what you can afford, you're still going to be able to make amazing content with a GH3 in 2020 if you put thought into all the other things that actually do matter. So if specs don't matter, what does matter? It is far more important. The most important thing about whatever you capture is what you're capturing. If your image is a blank wall, it doesn't matter if it's 8K or if it's 4K, it's still just a blank wall. When you look at promo videos and what people are featuring with the newest, latest, and greatest cameras and equipment, it's usually really cool subject material. And this has been the case for the longest time. If you film something unique and interesting, a landscape that's just breathtaking and beautiful and gorgeous, that's going to make the camera and the tools you're using look better just by the very nature of it looking good. Same thing with a model or a really expensive sports car or someone doing some amazing, cool, extreme sport, skateboarding or snowboarding. The subject matter makes the camera, the lens, whatever it is, look better and perform better at first glance. That's the foundation, right? So think about what you're putting in the frame. If it is just random scribbles on a piece of paper, you can film that and you can capture it with the greatest dynamic range of all time and film it in a super slow-mo mode, but it's still just as scribbles on a piece of paper, or it's a flower on the side of the road. And that's not that a flower on the side of the road can't look great, but it's also not all that unique or interesting from a video perspective or a photography perspective when a lot of people have access to that. So going to a location that's very different, maybe it's remote, maybe it's a locale that's hard to get to, can make the difference between, you know, the brand new Canon R5 or a slightly outdated GH3. What you film matters, so look for the most beautiful, eye-catching subject matter, or just be thinking about it as you're producing content, taking pictures. Think about what's in the frame, because that's the most important thing. From there, it's the lighting. What does the light do in the frame? The subject is one thing, but how is it lit? This matters far more than a camera, almost always, than a lens. How does the light fall? Think of cameras and lenses from 10 or 20 years ago. Still create beautiful images. Why? Usually because they're professionally lit. Does lighting fall into the same category? Absolutely, because you have things like CRI, right? Or lumens, how much output, how powerful is the light? You know, what can I do with it? And as things have changed from, you know, hot tungsten lights to then, you know, fluorescence and then LEDs, and then you have HMIs, it gets very technical. It gets, oh, what's the color temperature? How much of the, you know, spectrograph is in that light? And all this stuff. At the end of the day, how is the light shaped? How is it used? Where are their shadows? All this stuff is far more important than the difference between a light that has a CRI of 95 and another one, a CRI of 90. It may be important if you're doing something that needs to be very, very color accurate, but if you know your light is a little bit lower in terms of quality because it's a little bit cheaper, you can still do things to manipulate it to your advantage and make the most of it. Is it going to be as pixel perfect as the most expensive light? No. But most viewers, most people scrolling on Instagram, most people watching on YouTube aren't going to notice that either. They're going to notice the subject matter. They're going to notice the story. They're going to notice just where the light is and the quality of the light. Is it soft? Is it harsh? Same thing with sound. Sound is very, very technical. But does it sound good or does it sound bad? Those variations in good are very nuanced. And an audio engineer, somebody who's dedicated to the craft, is going to be able to tell maybe, hopefully, the difference between certain microphones, or, oh, the frequency, you know, you need to do this to manipulate your audio. But in general, the general public, an audience, is just going to know, does it sound good or does it sound bad? Hopefully this sounds good enough. And sometimes that's all it takes to put the content out there. Other times you really need to fine tune and tweak because you're compensating for a really big problem in the audio. And there are technical tools that will help you through that, but does it sound good? Does it sound bad? Is the lighting good or is it bad? Is the video good or is it bad? And these general buckets that things fall into, I think, are far more important to just make sure all of them line up to where the location is good, the camera is good, the audio is good, the lighting is good. They don't have to be the best. You don't have to film everything with a red. You don't have to do everything, you know, exactly to a 10. Is that going to be the most optimal way to do it? Yes, and that's what we can argue about. We can have those fun discussions of, like, if you were to have the budget and the resources and the time, would it be better to capture it in 8K or 4K? Well, yeah, go for 8K if you can afford it and you have the time to deal with it, for sure. But at the end of the day, if you have amazing 8K and you have the best looking footage ever, but you've paid no attention to the lighting, to the audio, to the actors, to the makeup, to everything else that's involved, it doesn't matter that it's 8K. You could have shot it at 2K if it had meant having everything else in that kind of, at that good level, to where there's nothing distracting. If you've ever watched a film where it's got great production value, the cinematography's great, the audio's great, the lighting, everything's so good, and then the costumes, the wardrobe will just look kind of off. It doesn't look authentic. It doesn't look real. I'm thinking about period pieces, you know, where their clothes are just too clean and it looks like, man, is everything polyester? Like, I thought this was like hundreds of years ago that this took place. Why does this look so cheap? It's shot with amazing cameras, captured by professionals. Oh, the wardrobe takes you out of it and makes that experience lesser. It would be better to, if you had to, sacrifice one thing in exchange for the other, which is often the case that many of us are in. If you have the luxury of going all out in all areas, absolutely. Always, you know, reach for the stars, try and do the most, do the best you can, strive for excellence. And that's why we argue about specs. So we know what that bar is. We know what the upper threshold is of like what is even possible based on the technical specs. But then how you get there, don't get so tunnel vision on just the specs alone that you forget everything else that also matters. So this is just kind of some words of encouragement, just talking from my own perspective, because I love talking about camera specs and all the latest and greatest in terms of technology and the things that are possible. But I also don't want people to think that that's the only thing I care about, because it's not. In fact, shooting with the S1H is, you know, based on specs, is a better camera than the GH5 based on specs alone. But is that all it's about at the end of the day? And no, it's not. There's some really valuable things that I actually appreciate about the GH5 now that I have my hands on the S1H, and just how different it is, because it is significantly different. Is it better? Based on the specs, yes, but does that end up making a better result? Well, like I said, that's a video for another time, but I at least wanted to talk about the specs versus, I don't know what you call it, just the creative energy, the fact that they don't matter, because they really don't. Don't let specs hold you back. Shoot with whatever you have, use whatever you have, invest in a full, robust kit that covers everything from video to photo to lighting to audio to editing and color grading and sound design. Like there are many buckets to fill with good quality. It's not just about the one perfect camera or the one perfect light, or if you just edit with this one piece of software, it makes all your dreams come true. No spec sheet is going to solve all of your problems. It's up to you to use the right tools for the right job. And a lot of that comes down to smart budgeting, because let's be honest, most of us don't have all the money in the world to just buy everything and anything that we want. It is about using those resources wisely, which is making sure that things are allocated appropriately so you don't find yourself filming garbage with an 8K RAW camera. You want to be filming quality content with whatever camera you can afford or makes sense to use given that project.